Hello, patrons.
Patrons,
Thank
what's up?
you for your support. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks for tuning
absolutely.
in. We hope you enjoyed last week's episode. It was fun to be back with you all, talking a little Airbender, another Masters of the Air. That was fun.
It was
Uh,
a bit more of a rant than a discussion at times, though, wasn't it?
yeah, it was probably a little bit more of a
I
rant.
think that's the thing. Like we don't like to add cynicism to the actual main show, so we sometimes save it for patron bonus content,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
hopefully our patrons don't think we're cynical just to them.
No, of course not. But it's fun
No,
to be a little cathartic from time to time.
you need it sometimes.
So this week we're going to talk about something that's much more positive. This is very, very exciting.
Yeah.
So last week, the Board of Governors of the Academy announced a new competitive Oscar category for Best Achievement in Casting. And this will
Hmm.
begin at the 98th ceremony in 2026 for the
Yep.
films of 2025. Brendan, what do you think about this new Oscar category?
Well, I think it's an interesting one because something we don't often talk about, at least when we give praise to certain films, we often talk about, oh, that's such a great cast. But we don't often single out casting directors and the work they
Mm-hmm.
have to do to really organize that, right? A
Yeah.
lot of times we think it's the director's choice to cast this person. And ultimately that's kind of true. But there's a lot of work that has to happen on the back end to make sure that happens, to make
Yes.
sure that the right people are entering the room at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So if we think a movie is perfectly cast, it doesn't just mean that actor decided to try out for this movie. Like there's a relationship that casting directors have to have with certain people to make sure that the marketing is done right, right?
Yeah.
And that's really interesting that we're seeing this kind of love and attention going to the casting directors now. At least I assume that they're going to be the ones who
Yeah.
receive this award.
Yeah.
And that would make a lot of sense. So hopefully this is a step in the right direction. Let's see stunt work come next. I think
Yeah.
that
There's
this is
certainly,
slowly making the way
yeah.
that way.
Yeah. We're inching our way to. I understand that this is lengthening the ceremony itself, but I do think there are other areas of film that need to be recognized. Casting is certainly
Yeah.
one of those. I know that there is a casting branch
Mm-hmm.
that has fought for this for a long time. So this is a
Mm-hmm.
great win for them. I do agree with you. Next, we need to get to stunts.
Yep.
That might be priority number one, but I'd also love to see vocal work be recognized,
Yep.
or motion capture as well, working our way toward that, among others.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this is a really great step. I do love this as well. You think of something like the cast of Oppenheimer and how immaculate that is.
I
I
know.
mean, every single actor was chosen perfectly for that
Yep.
movie, and it's an
Yep.
incredible ensemble as a result. It was one of those interesting conversations throughout the year when it came to the supporting performances of that film. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. Like, which
Yeah.
one was your favorite? And you were never wrong.
Yeah.
Like, you
Who's
could
better
choose
in this scene?
anyone.
Who's doing the better work in this scene? Oh, it doesn't matter. They're all good.
Yeah, like they are all fantastic.
Yeah.
You really can't go wrong with a movie like Oppenheimer. Or, I think of, and I don't know how involved the casting director is in this. I would
Right.
imagine he or she would have been a significant part of it in some way, but I don't really know for sure. But I think of something like Killers of the Flower Moon, in
Yeah.
the sense that, and part of it is they rewrote the script. Leo was supposed to have a different role and then ended up with the one that he did.
Yeah.
And say what you will about the performance. It's maybe not an Oscar, quote unquote, Oscar worthy performance, but it's one that I think is very
It
effective for
works
that
for the
film.
film. Yeah.
He's really great, very effective for it. And that's looking at that role and saying Leo, I think, is a better fit for this than what he
Mhm.
was going to do originally, given what the script is.
Yeah.
And that might be a little bit too specific of an example because there
But
was
even
reworkings with it. But my point
yeah.
in that is to say, at some point they thought, Leo, you're going to be better for this role instead of the one that you were originally cast as.
Yeah.
And that is something that you see a lot of when these casting directors are trying to
Yeah.
find the right person for the right role.
Absolutely. And I think a movie like Killers of the Flower Moon is a great example as to why casting is so important, because that's a movie that showcases very different ethnic groups as well. So there has
Yeah.
to be this understanding of how you fill those roles in the right way, not just an ethical way, but that also requires someone that has some
Mhm.
understanding of, how dialect changes, how heritage changes, and and
Mhm.
some of those historical things. Like, there are a lot of factors that come into play, and that's important. That's very important. So any movie like that that has that type of representation, like, there has to be investigative work done in a way to make sure that it's done right. And that's not easy. That's a risky job in a lot of ways, because that can make or break a movie by just simply who you cast in the role, regardless of if they're giving a good performance or not. And
Mhm.
that makes that movie especially a great example as to why casting is so important.
Completely agree. Or I think about casting directors looking at something or someone in this instance that maybe you're not terribly familiar with. Maybe their
Mhm.
work is on the smaller end,
Yeah.
but they are just so perfect for the role. And again, looking at 2023 as an example, Charles Melton in May December. Unless you
Mhm.
watched his TV work, which I didn't, you may
Yeah.
not be too familiar with a Charles Melton. And man, he goes toe to toe with two of the greats,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know? And so it's interesting to find like how
That's
casting
a great
directors
point.
can
Yeah.
find these gems that on the surface you go, I don't know this person, or
Yeah.
this might feel
Or
like an odd choice, but they
yeah.
end up being perfect.
Or in those cases where someone is cast for a role that is so outside their wheelhouse or their comfort zone. Like
Yeah.
my first example I would think of is maybe someone like Adam Sandler in Punch Drunk Love. But
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
like that was probably more of a PTA choice, because I think that they were networking even prior to making or even
Yeah.
writing that movie.
Uh-huh.
But that's an example of something like that happening.
Hmm.
Or when someone like Jim Carrey is playing his role in the Truman Show. Like there are certain actors that they're known for a particular shtick. So a casting director sometimes has to look at them and see there's maybe another note they can tap into here. Let's test this
Yeah.
out. So there is kind of a trial and error that has to happen with a good casting director to make sure that it's the right sort of fit. And
Hmm.
that's not an I could never do that job. I'll tell you what, I could
Yeah.
never do that job. That would stress me out too much.
For sure. I completely agree. And I will say maybe something that's underrated in that, when you flip that script a little bit, you
Yeah.
look at the other side of that coin, how easy it might be at times to overthink it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where, I look at something like maybe Barry Keoghan and really anything he does, but maybe the
Hmm.
Banshees of Inisherin, for example.
Hmm. Sure.
Like that just seems like the easy, like he's an Irish actor, it's an
Yeah.
Irish movie. You have this weird oddball character, Barry Keoghan. That's the easy go-to. And
Hmm.
it's maybe easy as a casting director to go, "Ah, that just seems too obvious. I don't
Hmm.
know. That just
Yeah.
seems too obvious." So you skip it and you try to find something that, might, look beyond the surface level. When
Yeah.
in reality,
That's
sometimes the
that's what
best
you
choice
need.
is the obvious one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that
Now
overthinking it is also a big part of the
now,
formula.
there are certain obvious ones that are so obvious you have to think outside the box. Like, if the script calls for a Ryan Reynolds type, don't just cast Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah.
Certain things like that, but you're not wrong. In certain cases, the obvious one is the right one. So that's the casting director just being very blunt and to the
Mhm.
point with it.
Well, and
And
that's
you need
something
that.
Greta Gerwig talked about
Yeah.
with Margot Robbie.
Yeah.
It's because at first it was like, okay, she's funding or producing the film.
And she's arguably the most beautiful actress working today, so of
Yeah, but
course she's going to be Barbie.
yeah, but at first they were like, do we like, and I think Margot's talked about this as well. Like, I don't
Yeah.
think she was immediately going to take it on, but as she kept reading the script, it was more like, nah, this is something that I should do. And of course, yes,
Mhm.
she's the most Barbie actress in Hollywood. It just
Right.
at some point the obvious thing just becomes the right thing to do,
Yeah. Yeah.
even if and it's okay to go outside the box or look beyond the
Mhm.
obvious. That has
Yeah.
certainly worked, but I think there is actually a skill set to that because it might be
Yeah.
your first thought is to always look beyond, okay, well, this is a Margot Robbie type or a
Hmm.
Leo DiCaprio type or a Robert De Niro type.
Hmm.
And so you look beyond that for the type when the best actor available is just that person.
Yeah.
And knowing when to utilize that obviousness, like I
Hmm.
do think there is a skill to that,
There is.
as
Yeah.
well as finding the gems and the other side of it. So
Yeah.
and everything in
Yeah.
between.
Yeah. It is an art form. That's why it should be recognized.
And that's
And as
exactly why it should
and,
be. Yeah.
and as we talked about, this is a stepping stone for other things. So if this makes the ceremony longer, I don't care. The ceremony
Yeah.
was never
I don't
long
care either.
enough, if you ask me. I mean,
Yeah.
actually, yeah, it is too long, but I don't really care as much about length. I just if the show's too long, if it just happens to be a bad show that year, it just
Yeah.
that's really what it depends on. It depends on the choices that
Hmm.
ABC really makes to structure the show for that particular ceremony.
Yeah.
Then it becomes either too long or too short or whatever the other circumstances are. But honor what you need to honor. And I hope they televise this one. I hope it's not one
Yeah.
that they just
I hope
do
so
like
too.
during a commercial break or something like that.
Yeah. Because as they state specifically, this is a competitive category. This isn't some
Mhm.
sort of special award
No.
or something that is beneath all, like they are adding this to the regular lineup.
Yeah.
And hopefully we get stunts on the heels of that. It's interesting. I'm curious about the timeline of it all because
Yeah.
what was it? The last the last new category was animation, right? And that was like
Yeah.
2002-ish,
It was the year Shrek came out.
2003, 2002,
2002, 2003, somewhere
something
around
along
that
that.
range. Yeah.
So 20-ish years in between new categories.
Mhm.
How long does it take for us to get the stunts or vocal work or whatever the next one
I
is?
I don't think it's gonna be 20 years. I think it'll be less than that, and I think it's primarily due to the particularity of this category because
Okay.
animation was a
Yeah.
very huge change for them, and
Yeah.
I and
Yeah.
y like, that and that's a like, some people would argue animation is so like, it's almost a genre. It's not a genre, it's a type of movie making, but it
Hmm.
is in its own classification, which is why I think, it being its own thing there makes a lot of sense, but something like casting, I feel like you can almost work into a similar narrative as something like, okay, now let's honor stunt work or vocal work because there are certain particularities that I
Because
can
it feels
see them.
like a craft
Yeah, like a
versus a
technical kind of
type of
thing.
film. Yeah.
And same with motion capture, as you talked about there. And while I would say motion capture and even vocal work are certainly more performance based, I don't even think you should, necessarily distinguish that from an actual acting performance. I think there's a lot of comparisons to make there, but
I
the
agree.
the craftsmanship of it and the technicalities of it, I can see these announcements almost coming more frequently than 20 years apart.
I
At
hope
least I wouldn't
so.
be surprised.
I hope so. I will also, while I agree with you that something like vocal work should be included with the main performances, the
Yeah,
reality is they won't.
they
They
won't.
won't.
No,
I'd rather see it separated and we just get recognition there.
I'd rather see something than nothing. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, similarly to animation, even,
Mhm.
how often will we talk about how these are the best films in a given year? This year is quintessentially that. You had The
Yeah.
Boy and the Heron, Spider Man Across the Spider Verse.
Yeah.
I don't know how it was a deep year, granted,
Mhm.
but you have two astounding animated movies that do not crack the lineup for Best Picture. I just
Yeah.
don't. It's just
Yeah.
never. I don't know
Well,
if it's gonna. It doesn't happen. It's only happened what, two times, three
2
times,
times, yeah,
two
and
times.
and sometimes they only filled a void because they were up to 10 nominees and they needed to fill it with something like Up or Toy
Yeah,
Story 3
Up I
most
think
recently.
only gets in because they were still trying to figure out what the structure was going to look like.
Oh, yeah, the new 10 categories thing
It
was
was a new
so new
one.
for them. It's like, "Okay, we need to
Like,
fill these spots with something."
yeah,
Um,
if that film came out today, I don't think it gets in.
oh, it would not.
Even with
Absolutely not.
even with all that crop of films, just the
Yeah.
way the Academy thinks now, I just don't think it gets in.
No, it would not. It would not. The one thing I will say that I don't want to say worries me, but one thing I will be potentially concerned about is if we're getting a lot of new categories as the years go on, it starts to lessen the competitive nature of some of these other broader, more upper tier categories, I guess you can say. So I guess, for instance, we talked about motion capture and vocal performance. Okay. Now, I want to see them recognized in some way, but in the case of those, I would really love to get the actor's perspective on it, because some of them might say, no, we don't want our own category. We would want to be competing against any acting performance because there's no difference. And if there's enough people that say that, I would be hopefully fighting for that potential option to happen. It most likely wouldn't, so I still want recognition to happen where it is, but I also want to make sure that the artists themselves are being honored for it in the way that they feel most comfortable with. And that's just, it's just something I thought about. It might not really be a big deal in the long run, but there is that particular thing.
I mean, Andy Serkis was screaming to the heavens for about a decade, and no one gave a shit, really.
Yeah. Well,
So-
he's really the example I'm thinking of.
You know,
of course, Scarlett Johansson and Her, who should have been nominated for that
another
movie.
one. I mean, motion capture is so much more prevalent now than it was 15, 20 years ago, in big part to Andy Serkis.
Yeah.
You know, but I think about a lot of the conversation we had last year about Avatar: The Way of Water. Like, those performances are really, really great and very moving. And obviously it's all motion captured performance.
When did Sam Worthington become a decent actor?
I don't know. That was, I still think about that performance a lot. It's just, it's so good.
I mean, to say it's his best performance of his career is not even selling it high enough. It's a genuinely good performance.
It's genuinely awesome. No, it's great. Every time, you know, I was just talking to Brennan offline before we got recording here about my son and his soccer adventures. There was a moment when I was taking him to practice about a month ago, and he was watching that movie on his iPad on the way to soccer. And it's, of course,
perfect way to watch it.
Well, it's, yeah, I know, right? So he's watching it. It gets to that, and I'm driving, obviously, so I can't see it, but I can.
But
hear
you can
it.
hear it. You've seen the movie enough
I've
to at
seen
least
the
put a
film like
visual
5 or
image to
6 times, so
Yeah.
I know I can visualize. I can hear it and visualize everything in my head. And it gets to the ending when they're having that funeral, and I am uncontrollably sobbing, like just uncontrollably sobbing on my way to my son's soccer practice.
That's a more cathartic moment from that film. Of course, we're getting a little sidetracked by transitioning to talking about how good Sam Worthington is in Avatar 2. But I think of simple moments like his exchange, some of his exchanges with Stephen Lang's character.
Yeah, so good.
Like just simple things. Where, doesn't he say, like, he says something like, "Well, let's get it done." That's something as simple as that. It's a
where the trip
line.
began.
Yeah,
when we were leaving the driveway and he hit play on the iPad, it was like right up at that moment. And so I'm getting giddy in the front seat just listening to it. And then by the time we got to the practice, I don't know, 25 minutes later, we were at the end of the film. And so I was able to experience all of that again. And I can't see it visually, practically. In my mind, I can.
It doesn't matter.
Hearing
it still works. Yeah.
But his performance is so great. It's so impeccable. And it's, I mean, I think about that, of course, Serkis's work throughout the years and the Apes trilogy and Lord of the Rings. And there's others that you could talk about as well.
Yeah.
It's a type of performance that I do think should be considered, but I don't think the Academy is at a point now where they look at that seriously. I really don't think they look at it as some sort of entertainment fluff, and I think that's it. I don't know if they treat it beyond the popcorn of it all, with any sort of significance.
That could change. We've seen Academy members change and bring a new perspective.
To your point, I might be saying that myopically because I feel like the last time we had a real conversation about that was some years ago now. I don't know if we've had because it hasn't really been a huge talking point. No one's been out there championing it like Serkis was. And I do think Serkis should have been nominated for some of his motion capture performances.
Yeah.
But hopefully we are veering in that direction.
Yeah.
I would hope to with the way the Academy's evolving since 2016. Maybe we're closer to that than I think we are,
I think we
but I
are.
don't know.
I genuinely do think we are. And maybe I'm being too optimistic because I don't want to give the Academy too much credit, but I think we are moving in the right direction. And I think seeing this new category around casting, like honestly, I didn't really expect that. If there was going to be a new category, I was expecting something like stunt work because that has been part of the narrative for, I don't want to say longer, but I feel like that narrative has been louder, or at least more prevalently seen because of publications taking advantage of that. It's more obvious, I guess you can say. But at
Yeah.
least having something like this, like being able to open up, create a new category around what some people might say is like the hidden art of movies, or at least one of the hidden arts, like that is a great stepping stone. And
I agree.
perhaps just that simple act has given me enough optimism that, if one day Andy Serkis gives yet another motion capture performance in the year 2035 and gets nominated for Best Leading Actor, I don't know if I would be all that surprised in the way that it's going now.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to see it, and given just how prevalent it is,
Yeah.
I feel like we're seeing it so often these days. I also think of something like, and again, I'm not equating this to awards. I'm just thinking
Mhm.
about motion capture performances and how far they've come. But
Right.
like, aside from the other examples, like Josh Brolin as Thanos, I thought was really great, and that is
Mhm.
a fully CG character where he has to bring a heft to those movies. Otherwise, the whole thing falls flat. And I think
Yeah,
both
he
of
has to
those
bring the
films
emotionality to it.
are extraordinary, especially in Infinity War, where there is an emotional nuance to the character. Like on the page, they are trying to write him within these complexities of how he sees the genocide he's doing as something that is pure and good. Like that
Mhm.
has to come through in his performance.
Mhm.
If not, then that whole film just
Yeah.
doesn't work at all.
No,
And I think it comes through incredibly well. So I do think we're veering toward that.
I think so.
But to your point, maybe it's another 10 years. I don't know. The one
Mm.
that I don't think we have an excuse for anymore, because the form of filmmaking has been around for 100 years, and that is animation. Like
Mhm.
vocal performances need to be considered more. We've had
Yeah.
100 years of them. There's
Yeah.
just no excuse for it at this point.
I mean, you watch what these people are doing in the booth, right? And
Mhm.
in order to capture a proper vocal performance, it is a performance. It's in some ways just a different technological surrounding than something like motion capture. But motion capture requires, you know, a a physicality to it. It requires an emotional
Yeah,
response in order to convey something vocally that is that genuine emotion for that particular
yeah,
scene or situation. And vocal actors for, let's say, an animated movie, or in the case of someone like Scarlett Johansson and Her, we referenced her earlier.
yeah.
Like,
Another great one.
like,
Yeah,
like that vocal performance doesn't work if she just simply delivers the lines in her voice. Like
yeah.
it does
I
not.
agree.
She has to act that. Like if you actually released her in the booth doing that, it would look like a performance. It would,
Yeah, yeah.
because that's just how you convey it. So yeah, that we need to recognize that as a quote unquote performance.
Exactly. Because that's what it is.
Yeah.
And I think there should be, like every other craft in film, some sort of competitive recognition for it.
And that
But
that's like the perfect way for the Academy to surprise us on Oscar nominations day. They always like to throw a curveball in one category or two. And then, like let's say for instance, this year's ceremony coming up, Justin Trier nominated for Best Director for Anatomy of a Fall. That was genuinely surprising.
yeah,
What if like someone like a Scarlett Johansson is nominated for Her? And it's like, we did not expect that.
yeah.
Who at that? Like that is a perfect opportunity for the Academy to take us by surprise.
And I think it's going to take, because the one thing we haven't seen yet
Mm-hmm.
is a true, dedicated, financed
Mm-hmm.
campaign for a vocal performance.
That's true.
That's never happened.
And that's a great point. So, in some ways, while we like to throw shade at the Academy for not doing this yet, have they really even realized that that's something that they could do?
I don't know. Yeah,
And that, yeah. So, is this
it's
more on the
gonna.
studios then?
I was gonna say it might take a Disney or a DreamWorks Pixar, which is obviously Disney.
Yeah.
It's going to take one of them to step up to be like, no, this performance, this vocal performance is that good. We are going to fund a campaign for it.
Yeah.
And it'll be the first of its kind.
Mhm.
It would be the first of its kind.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know about everybody else. Maybe you guys disagree, but I would love to see that.
I would love to see
I
that.
would love to see it.
Doesn't necessarily mean that person they're campaigning has to win, but it could create a new
Yeah.
trend. You know, it could create a movement.
Yeah. Just to get a nomination, that would be massive. Just
Absolutely.
a nomination alone.
Do
would
you
be
know
huge.
do you know how much you can brag if you are the first actor or actress nominated for a vocal performance?
historic.
At that point,
It
it's
would
like
be
I don't even need I don't need the win. I have
Yeah.
the win right now because I'm
You
the
have
first
the
of my
nomination.
kind.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, yeah, I mean, hopefully we get there one day.
Yeah.
But like, you know, animated films have never really been a conversation for Best Picture, even if they are some of the best films in a given year.
Mhm.
They're just not considered for Best Picture for
Yeah.
whatever reason. They have their own category, and I think as a result of that mentality, unless there's a massive change, and I don't see one on the horizon,
Mhm.
that's probably how vocal performances will have to be recognized. Instead of in the main categories, they'll have to have their own separate category. I think
Which
that's where it's
is
gonna go.
which is both welcoming but also unfortunate given what we'd like to actually see happen, because then it sadly creates this stigma that, oh, just because it's an animated movie, then it's not allowed to be nominated for Best Picture, or oh, it's a foreign language film, that's its Best Picture category, it's quote unquote Best Picture category, that's where it competes in.
Yeah.
That's a very wrong and incorrect mentality.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying some people do genuinely believe that or are ignorant enough to believe that, but some people could. Some people could
could.
interpret it that way.
I agree. And look, Parasite broke all the molds. So it's possible
It's another
that
starting
something
point.
comes
yeah.
along and it breaks all of the rules.
That's the thing. Like
So,
every few years with the Oscars, we see some type of domino fall. It doesn't happen every year, but I feel like every few years, every couple ceremonies, we're seeing more dominoes fall more frequently than we ever have before.
yeah.
Like Parasite winning Best Picture. Now only some years later, Best Casting. Okay, a new category. Like two things like that in a span of what, like 5 years, we've seen
Yeah.
these new changes. That's certainly tighter than I think we would have seen something like this happen in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that's a good sign.
It's a good sign. We shall see. With that, I think we'll end this conversation here. But
Okay.
we hope you all enjoyed it. Again, thank you everyone for your support. It really does mean the world to us.
Absolutely.
So with that, again, thank you. And we hope you enjoy this episode as we do another Best Picture draft.